To help bridge the narrow divide between UFOs and the stuttering evolution of the human soul. This is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. One of the most prominent advocates of engaging the UFO phenomenon for what it can teach us about ourselves, our souls, and our place in this strangely unfolding cosmos, James Iandoli is a student of transformation. He's an experiencer, a podcaster, and a teacher of communication protocols that seek to connect us with the seemingly limitless array of intelligences that cohabitate this reality alongside us. His contacts in this subject are deep and varied, and his podcast interviews reflect a deep level of empathy and personal involvement with a mystery that has transfixed our species for decades, perhaps millennia. In addition to his fantastic show Engaging the Phenomenon, Iandoli was featured in the Cosmosis documentary series and is one of the primary organizers of the recent Inquiries into Anomalous Experiences and the Phenomenon conferences held in New York City. His newest project, a YouTube channel called Exploring Higher Realities, aims to help viewers connect with the ineffable and transcend themselves through a potent and productive spiritual practice. Today, we're hoping to discuss the boundary that exists between nuts and bolts, cloak and dagger UFO shenanigans and the spiritual realities these beings beckon towards. Iandoli seems like he's found a crucial balance between getting the esoteric message while also staying grounded in the material world long enough to know the score between the feds, contractors, whistleblowers, experiencers, mystics, and our seemingly exotic assortment of lingering out-of-town non-human guests. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, James, for having me on. Yeah, you really have one of the most thoughtful and thought-provoking shows out, actually, in my opinion. Really, if I can say, hyper deep. So,
Yeah.
I'm really I'm glad to be on with you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. One of the things that I have struggled with since I got into the topic was like I just mentioned, there's two polarities really within the subject. There's the nuts and bolts stuff, and then there's what people would sometimes call the woo. I think that they have come together more. I don't think it's as much like you have to be one or the other as much as it used to be, it seems like. But there is still that gulf. And part of me wonders how to keep from going all in on one or the other. Like sometimes when I'm like really in the weeds with the esoteric stuff, I'm like, this is the answer to everything. And I kind of want to just go off and, live on a mountaintop and meditate. There's a lot of important stuff going on in the physical side of the discussion around government and secrecy and all of those things. And all of those are a pivotal conversation, not just for the UFO subject, but also for the state of our society in general. There's a lot of issues there that need to be unwound in order for us to, I think, figure out how to be a, country based on justice and liberty and all that again, if ever we do. But how do you find that balance? I mean, like obviously you are into the woo. You've made it part of your approach, and you do it better than almost anyone else. So I'm wondering how you think about that.
I appreciate that. I just think that I I guess you could say like the middle path, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but I try to look at everything as like what can this teach me, so to speak. So even something very physical ha can have metaphysical implications if you choose to look at it that way. So it's really a lens, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I've I mean I've experienced both, right? I've experienced the kind of metaphysical aspect, but then for me to say what, let's say somebody has a major contact experience that seems spiritual, right? Ultimately, they have to integrate that if they're going to kind of move on, right? Otherwise, it could drive them crazy, really.
Yeah.
And so, how do you make that practical, right? And making that practical is bringing it to like a very kind of even nuts and bolts uh, kind of perception almost of like how is this how does this have utility, right? How is it useful in my life, or how does it change me or what I see? So again, even something that's seemingly physical. I always say that the UFO phenomenon is the bridge between physics and metaphysics because there's these very physical components, right? Like people are recording craft on gun camera footage, just UFOs tracked on radar, but then they can dematerialize, communicate telepathically, somehow, and wind up in right in the center of a synchronicity, right? Like what does that mean?
Yeah.
So it begs the question, so like if there's this physical object that's real in our consensus reality that has the ability to act like in a sense physically demonstrate things that we would observe in a quantum level, uh like how is that possible, right? And I always just saw I always felt like I learned more if I looked at it in an inclusive way, because even if I'm looking at something in a metaphysical or spiritual lens, right? Like everything is one kind of thing. Let me go to that extreme spectrum.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, okay, so you know, to bring that to the nuts and bolts side, is like, what does that actually mean? Right. And like a translation of that would be compassion, right? Which has real real life effects.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, it's just kind of a middle path approach, and one does not negate the other, right? It doesn't have to be black or white or all or nothing, right? I always think that there's a great level of nuance and context to be explored, and examining both, um, in my opinion, is more comprehensive and more
Yeah.
relatable.
Yeah. Like Jeffrey Kripal says, both and, right? Leave everything on the table rather than trying to pick a camp to be a part of. What would you say is the goal of your work? I mean, you've been hosting your shows for a while, and what do you think that you are hoping to accomplish? Is it just a learning process for you? What's it for?
It's definitely in part a learning process for me.
Yeah.
It also allows me to have some of these awesome conversations with people like yourself, or Jeff Kripal, or Kelly Chase, J. Christopher King, Jim
Yeah.
Semivan, right? Just like people that are really into this stuff, right? Fellow travelers.
Yeah.
And but another part for sure for me, right? And I don't want to be self-grandiose or anything, but because of my experiences, and even in my experiences, I received the communication. I put air quotes because of the interpretive possibilities of that, right? But as far as I understand, in my personal experiences, I got the communication from non-human intelligence that they wanted people to know that they were here, and I I felt obligated in a sense in having those experiences, and the transformation that it put me through in a way that I feel is positive. I was like, I felt obligated to share that with people, right?
Yeah.
So, it's part sharing kind of this broader conversation. I think it's, uh, for people who, let's say, know, right? They have gnosis, they have firsthand experience, have some kind of not an obligation or a duty, but I mean, something, I feel highly motivated to share that, um, with a larger audience, but at the same time, like I love having, this way to participate in a community with people, and like I'll do an interview with, whoever it is, let's say Jeffrey Kripal, right? And in the comments, people are putting forth questions or sharing information that I had no idea about, right? And I'm like, oh my God. So even just going through the comments of like a video of an interview I learned so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
People are like, oh, what about this book, or, this equation, or this theory? And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm learning more by putting the conversations out and then getting feedback, right? So it's like real life quantum AI simulation where I'm learning in the process as well.
Yeah.
So it's all the above.
Yeah, feeding your journey even as you're helping others figure out their own. I love that. When you talk about having the contact experience and then feeling like there was a sense of mission afterwards, which is something I've heard from a lot of experiencers, um, is that something, I mean, you do, CE5, right? That's something that you've taught people, and I mean, it's something that you've talked about. Is that, would you say that's an ongoing conversation, or is it more like just a communing that happens in terms of that relationship? I mean, is there, I'm not sure how to phrase this. Is there an entity out there that you feel like you're connecting with on the regular, or is it more a sense of presence that you get when you do CE5? Can you describe for us what that relationship is like?
Yeah, that's a very nuanced and insightful question because it could be either or in the sense that I mean there certainly are consistent themes, right? And there seem to be consistent manifestations or let's say that you're doing CE5 on a weekly basis and you get a typical like feeling, right? Or sensation or vibe and a similar manifestation, right? And I don't mean like, oh, like people talk about power ups where you see like an orb come in and power up, which again, there are misidentifications, but let's in this for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say uh you have this manifestation coming in, it's a let's say it's a gold orb and it always does the same thing as like a signature, right? So
Mhm.
that seems like a continuing thing. And to some extent, you have to develop a discernment
Yeah.
and not just in identifying genuine UAP. That's like superficial surface level, like CE5 101 is trying to identify anomalies from conventional air traffic, space junk, satellites, all that stuff. But another reason why meditation is in my opinion a key part of contact modalities, contact work, CE5 heists, is to build the discernment from if you feel like you're receiving a subtle communication, right, an impression from non-human intelligence, is that something that is being communicated to you, or is that your own thought? And so that's very there's a very kind of like vipassana aspect of kind of analyzing and noting what's transpiring, even on very subtle levels.
Mm.
And then in developing that discernment, uh, what is it communicating with you? So ultimately, I'm going to say, yeah, and CE5 that can happen for sure. Uh, for me, I have had you could say regulars, right?
Mm.
But it's not always the same entity or intelligence. And just be due to my nature, I'm, believe it or not, I'm highly skeptical, right? I try to really hold a fine line on what I know for sure and what I think.
Yeah.
So and maybe this is unwise in a sense, but I try to not give into the temptation of assigning that each impression is from the same entity or what have you. I do absolutely believe that, yeah. I mean, once you start the CE5, right? There's some kind, in my opinion, there's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, I don't try to overassign it and I just take note of it and that's it. And I let it go because I don't want to mislead myself even and
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
it's the same entity all the time and then you start developing this belief system over it. So
Can be
just
dangerous. That could be really
well
dangerous ultimately.
I mean there could be benefit to it, but just in the same again, like I'm totally uh like think of reincarnation is genuine, right?
Mm,
Um, but at the same time, I'm ultra hesitant to think that any impression I have of a past life is a true thing, right? And in that aspect, I come at it at a very Zen perspective in like here now, right? Even if I have impressions of my past life and incarnations, I'm in this life now and I'm going forward. So that doesn't even matter, right? Again, there is a certain wisdom in like the karmic biography aspect where you're continuing this kind of soul journey through these many lives. Um, but personally, I don't want to get lost in that, right?
yeah,
Or give into that. And at the same time, again, this is kind of very Zen. I could look at that almost as a distraction, as like I'm here now. What am I
exactly.
doing now? And let me just focus on that because that's
Yeah,
what I know for sure.
yeah.
So that's just my approach. There's other people that will have the ongoing conversations and they're connected to a certain entity and they continue to interact with that entity on that level. And I enjoy learning and listening about that, but just for my own practice and
Hmm.
just to keep myself level and centered, I I try not to go too far into that.
Yeah. That I think that that's the wise approach. I think that if you start to assign identity to one particular phenomenology that's happening in your experience, and then you can start to have conversations with things, and it's at some point you may lose the thread, and it's hard to know where your imagination starts and the actual thing ends, and so you don't want to conflate the two. So to be conservative there, I think is important and a wise way to go. You,
I just want to say one more
yeah,
thing to that is like
sure.
for certain, like, and this is what I mean about developing discernment, and that comes with time, practice, experience. Like there's no shortcut. Like I'm gonna optimize my discernment over a weekend of training. Like that's not
Yeah, yeah,
happening.
that's not
Like
going to happen.
put in
Yeah,
20 years and then come talk to me about discernment.
yeah,
But for sure, there are times when I get like a similar vibe and I'm like, I recall this feeling, this
mhm,
vibe, this sensation from particular experiences. And when something's different, right? So for sure there is that, but I try not to latch onto it. So and in that sense, I also think that there, even with CE5, that we're interacting with different intelligences. Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer, will always say that CE5 is for contact with interstellar civilizations, that it's for communication with non-human intelligence. And I respect his experience and his opinion on that. In my own opinion, and it's even weird because even when Stephen Greer teaches it, he talks about uh, becoming aware of like celestial entities, which we can call like an angel.
which
And
is not
like
a non-human, which is not what he just said.
right. So, or ascended masters or whatever. And like all
Yeah,
this stuff comes up in the CE5 and like this glimmering ball of light that just zoomed past me in a circle. How am I going to say that's an extraterrestrial or a
yeah.
celestial or an angel?
Check out the license plate, right?
Right. I mean, like you there again with developing discernment, and even celestial perception or spiritual perception. I don't want to turn people off, but let's just say subtle perception.
Yeah,
You begin to develop a feeling for, I think this may be associated with maybe like this seems like an ET phenomenon or this feels like an angelic thing, but ultimately you have to admit to yourself you don't know unless there's some kind of dispositive communication. Even then, I'm skeptical on like taking communications at face value because of error and interpretation, and that's a whole nother conversation there. But
yeah.
ultimately, I just had on Dahlia Burgon, and she practices mindsight, but her daughter is one of these non-speakers that has super high telepathic capability that that like the non-speakers that are shown in the telepathy
Telepathy
tapes.
tapes. Yeah, yeah, okay.
So, and her daughter Lidu, that has this raw telepathic power. She claims that she sees entities around her all the time, and they're the ones that are around us generally in proximity to us, which I do think that there's non-human intelligence around us all the time, and that's part of Jim Semivan's indigestible
Yeah, yeah.
argument is that, there's all these entities around. How are you going to communicate that to the public? And I get that. But she talks about these beings that are constantly around us are part of our team, right? And that could be like, I guess, I don't want to say what she said it was, but like guardian angels or extra, something that's extra dimensional, maybe, or even something that's angelic. And so what Lidu calls the team, like these entities, non-human intelligence that are constantly around us, which may be people that passed on, uh, souls that have not incarnated here yet, and the like. I think all of this stuff comes up when you're doing CE5. Even if your intention is just for extraterrestrial intelligence, I think this other stuff can seep through. Although I do think there, if you have a directional intentionality, that it brings up the probability that you're going to interact with whatever you're seeking, but it doesn't limit it to that at all either. Like as an example, if you're out, I live in the Hudson Valley, but let's say you're out at like Mount Shasta, which people do, or Joshua Tree, and you're participating in the CE5 and you did all this meditation and intention work and you're opening that field of awareness up for an interaction that you might be interacting with elementals or other kind of like, you know, subtle entities that are in that area as well. It might not all just be extraterrestrial.
Yeah. Well, that's like what Lou Elizondo was the point he was making with the that short story or the book that he mentioned, Chains.
Chains of the Sea.
Change of the Sea, yeah, where it was like all of these different elements, at one time, where you had AI and then you had aliens around landing from outer space, but then you also had the spirits of the forest, and they were all kind of, it's everything at once. Yes, and not no, but, which is again goes back to that whole idea. We're teaming with life one way or the other here. Uh,
Yeah, and I think so. And I think when you're practicing CE5, part of what you're doing is you're training and you're opening your subtle perception, and that in turn allows you to become aware of not just extraterrestrial intelligence and communications, but all this other stuff you start to become aware of.
how do you now? For myself, like I feel like I'm on a spiritual journey, which is partly what motivates me the most in terms of my life, right? Like I meditate a lot. I've been studying a lot in that regard. But there's that path, and then there's also this path of exploration and conversation, communication with CE5 and other modalities. And how does one inform the other for you? I sometimes worry that like the one is a distraction from the pure other, like you were saying before, the Zen like approach. Like, isn't all this like the flashes from your past life? Well, yeah, it's there, but is that really what's important, or is it important that I work on transcending self, or like not being caught up in any of this stuff because I'm trying to find, sartery or enlightenment or whatever.
Yeah,
It sounds trite when you say it, but you know what I mean. And so, how do you think about that?
I love this question because this is something that I constantly am being mindful of in my
Hmm.
own practice, in my own daily life. If I'm being pulled too far in one direction or another. And so what I found, because a lot of spiritual teachers, right? And, for better or worse, and again, there is wisdom to it saying like, oh, this is all distraction. Don't mind it. Just awake, 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 right? Awaken, focus on the ultimate path of awakening and don't be distracted by cities, which are spiritual powers. Don't be distracted by non-human intelligences like devas or angels. Um, so there is a wisdom in that, right? But there's also a wisdom, in my opinion, of just like again this middle path thing. Like, okay, what can this teach me? Because ultimately, if we're fractals of the infinite, um, every interaction that I have with reality, whether it's James Falk or whether it's with Jeffrey Kripal or my daughter or an aunt, is
Hmm.
an opportunity to learn about oneself through the other,
Yeah,
right? It's a way of uh, collecting the unconscious collective, right? If we truly are one uh, unified consciousness and we're just all fractals of the infinite, every interaction, every moment, every thing is an opportunity to learn about yourself. So I think if you have that perspective rather than a perspective of chasing an experience or chasing an idea, right? This kind of balance between attachment and aversion. You don't want to be one, because also if you're just sitting there in meditation or you're practicing sadhana or you're sticking to the eight limbs of yoga or the eightfold path and the four noble truths and you are having experiences and you keep pushing them away, that's actually an aversion.
sure.
So an aversion is just as detrimental as attachment to your practice.
Mhm.
So again, for me, the kind of middle path, and I believe Sean Esbjorn Hargens talked about this a little bit, maybe in one of the interviews I did with him. But just the idea of like, well, we're having these experiences, we might as well learn from them, right?
Yeah,
And again, in my opinion, it's like I do try to stay mindful of like, okay, am I going too far down this rabbit hole and is it taking away from my practice? So I do always come back to that, and I often contemplate it. But at the same time, because of my experiences, right, I feel like I have a dharmic uh, duty, right, or dharmic path that even in my own awakening process, that part of my dharma or my duty of being here because I've had such experiences is to assist others and join others in this path of even say understanding the phenomenon,
yeah.
right? So it's definitely where's your intention,
Hmm.
and just being mindful of like if it's contributing to your greater to your dharmic path or if you're going off track. And yeah, for me, it's a balancing act. So I'm constantly considering that and trying to say, okay, like how does one help the other? Because they can be complementary.
Yeah.
But we just have to be mindful of it.
Well, that leads into a good next question where, I mean, I feel like that, humanity broadly or whatever, got off this track of materialism, got off on this track of materialism a while ago. And while that was productive in terms of, material sciences and allowed us to discover a lot of things about the nature of the physical world, it also closed a lot of doors, obviously. And we are kind of struggling now to reopen those or reconceive of a universe that has more to it than what's merely on the surface. I think that by studying this topic and helping to spread the message of the things that happen in this space, it would ultimately be a service to humanity to begin to sort of re-encounter enchantment, right? Like to once again experience the world as somewhat magical, and so I feel like that is a motivation that is not centered in selfishness, but something that could be ultimately of service. What do you think? How do you think society could or will benefit ultimately if that idea of semivans that we're surrounded by beings of every sort and they're
Yeah.
everywhere and we want to toss out swear words over it? Ultimately, how do you think that could end up being good for humanity?
Yeah, and for Jim, I'll say, he says that, but I mean, if you're looking at the bigger picture, reading in between the lines is he'll say that and he's playing devil's advocate, but here he
Mm.
is talking about it publicly, right?
Oh,
So
sure. Yeah, yeah.
he's very much like, you can see um the struggle that he goes through, like out in the open, like in that aspect where he's still pushing for disclosure, right? Or the aspect of disclosure which he thinks should be disclosed, which is the general non-human intelligence is here kind of thing.
Yeah.
The reality of that. So I'm sorry, what was your question again? Just
Basically
because I want
that,
to
like,
be, yeah.
if that version of his disclosure, which is that we are surrounded
Okay,
by,
yeah, I got you.
how does that how does that benefit us? I mean, and there are dangers associated with it, pretty obviously, but how do we try to find the positive out of that and stick to that side of it?
I mean, I just it's crazy to me. To me, it's just as obvious as like humans discovering that the Earth is a globe or round and we're not the center of the universe and we're in the solar system. It's just a fundamental reality, right?
Yeah,
So it's not as if wow, now we know these entities are here and they're going to start flooding into our lives. They've been here the whole time,
yeah,
right? It's just a natural evolution, and again, maybe even a remembering, because I tend to
exactly. That's a
think
good point. Yeah,
in our ancient times that we had this knowledge, cosmological knowledge, and we probably had open interactions with a variety of entities through different cycles of time, right? So I don't think this is something new. I think it's new again for our modern Western society. If you look at a lot of the Eastern traditions, when they talk about devas and angels and um, even small g gods and whatever, they're not talking about it like we do in the West of like, oh, those are angels and they're in these myths and stories. Like they take it literally. I know I
hmm
have some friends at work who are they're Tibetan Buddhists and they teach me about some of that Dharma, but like they take it pretty literally. There's if they're more westernized too, they'll think, oh, well, maybe it is an idea, but it's part of their tradition. But I think it's just like it's inevitable that we're going to eventually stumble across the reality of non-human intelligences, but not only non-human intelligences, but this interactive reality, right? That we see with quantum mechanics, which is
yeah,
kind of like the underlying aspect that your thoughts are things, and we participate in reality.
yeah.
Just very akin to John Wheeler's participatory universe.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And so your intentions, your thoughts, your words, your actions, all on different levels have an effect, a domino effect that's in what in Buddhism they call dependent origination, where everything is interdependent of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so those philosophies and ideas have been with us for thousands of years, but now we're we're kind of like becoming meta human and observing it in real time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's fascinating, right? And I think it's only gonna propel us into a greater understanding. And again, this kind of re-enchantment. I think to me, when I hear about these things, I'm not like, oh my God, there's all these other entities around me. I'm like, for me, I'm filled more with a sense of wonder.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's going to be on each individual's whatever their inclination is how they're going to react to it ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, greater awareness of all these things is only better for us.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. My biggest fear is that and I think this is inevitable to a certain extent, that a lot of people are going to fall back on superstition and their religiosity to explain a lot of it, and then that could be dangerous in some respects. But I think that there will be, if this happens in terms of one big divulgence, like okay, folks, here's the truth, or something happens and we're faced with it, then there's going to be a time of settling where people have to figure out how they're going to think about it and how it's going to change their lives. And I think that's going to be rough. And I think that there will be some reactions from folks who are really, really
Well,
religious or, but we'll get through that once we realize that, like you said, it doesn't mean that we're being constantly attacked by demons or that things are, constantly after us. It's we're living in no different a reality. It's just our knowledge about it is different. And so we can, calm down,
yeah.
hopefully.
And generally speaking, I'm an optimist. I'm
Yeah.
optimistic. My when I'm talking to anybody, my inclination and is to assume competence,
Hmm.
right? So I assume competence in humanity, right? Nobody is ready, no matter what they say. Nobody's ready to be a parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No, I know that.
we do it anyways. We just it's so natural to us. So and you learn as you go, and that's what we do as humans in humanity. We have always done this. We've done this every generation. We've adapted to the when they learned about germs, right? It was like, oh my God, like there's these microorganisms freaking everywhere, right? Like you can panic about that all day. But guess
Yeah.
what? People learned about it. They learned you wash hands, whatever, and they got over it. Now nobody cares about, like they're
Yeah.
mindful of it, but it's like it's not freaking anybody out. At first, I'm sure like, oh my God, there's all these little life forms every which way, everywhere. They're all over us, right?
Yeah.
And at first, like the initial thought, we might have knee-jerk reactions, but at the end of the day, we got over it. And it's like, that's why, it's so funny with all the social initiatives and conditioning around the UAP topic these days. It's like almost like nobody cares. You
Yeah.
had a super inside, whistleblower, David Grush, come forward and say there's crash retrieval programs, there's reverse engineering programs. We might have contracts with non-human intelligences, and
Bodies.
the government's probably killed people over it, and nobody flinched,
Yeah.
right? It got hype, right? I think ultimately it did spread awareness, and I commend people like David Grush. I believe that David Grush is somebody with the best intentions. Um, but like, look, nobody, we didn't like spiral out of, you know, what we just everybody just moved on with their day. Some people were fascinated. It got opened some people's minds. More people are involved now because of that. But again, ultimately, like our reality didn't crumble, right? And
Yeah.
again, my thing that I always go back to is assume competence. I assume competence in humanity.
Yeah.
We've overcome thousands and thousands, 200,000 years of, you know, craziness, right? And we're still here somehow. So
Yeah.
there's no other way but forward, right?
Yeah.
So in my opinion, is like let's just get on with it, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Rip the
that's the
Band-Aid
thing.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, even with like CE5, right? Is like people will say, oh, you don't know what you're interacting with. And I mean, like, first of all, I had non-human intelligence reached out and interacted with me, right? Maybe something within me provoked that. I don't know, but either way it happened. And my thought with like engaging the phenomenon, right, or even exploring higher realities is let me just go directly at whatever it is, right? Rather than I mean there are I love all the work that's been done in the field, like the amazing books and lectures and researchers and research that's been done. But like if you're an individual wondering, like you can engage in that, but you can also engage directly with the phenomenon and in modern terms, F around and find out. Right. Like you really want to know? There's a way.
Yeah.
Again, I always put a disclaimer out there just because you can have a completely magnificent contact experience and it can be still be disruptive to your life. So when it comes to CE5, I say only if you're somebody that says I'm going to do it no matter what. Anyways, I don't care what anybody says. That's the kind of person that should be doing it because they also, without knowing it, they have the subconscious like spiritual protection kind of thing going on as well. Like that fortitude is very um is a great spiritual defense in it within itself, I would say, if people are worried about that kind of thing. But if somebody's like really on like I don't know if I should do it, um, then they might not want to engage in that because again, there's like I said, you can have a magnificent even spiritual type of realization through something like CE5 and contact modalities. But then you might also be like, why am I working this 9 to 5 job? And, you know,
Yeah. Exactly.
married to this person who doesn't care about any of this stuff. I need to live my true life. So
Yeah,
it could,
disruption. Yeah,
yeah, it could be super disruptive, even if it's completely benevolent, if you want to say it like that. So I always put
yeah,
a disclaimer out there for that.
yeah. Um, there was a quote from you I saw online that was saying that there were high-ranking people that either you had spoken to or someone who you knew had spoken to them, a source, and said that there are NHI among us acting as like maybe in disguise among us, right? Like, and they take this very seriously.
Yeah,
Um, I have often thought, and maybe this is fantasy, paranoid fantasy on my part, but there are swings within human consciousness that sometimes seem rather inexplicable to me. And I don't know if that there are forces, elements, creatures, beings that can feed on human consciousness or direct it in certain ways to get certain objectives done. Both of those realities represent an invasive and malignant kind of behavior if it's indeed happening. Do you think any of that kind of thing is happening? Do you have any evidence of it from your own experience or from things that you've heard from other people?
I I mean, as far as evidence, I don't know what I could say about that. I do think that
Yeah.
is something that's happening, but I think it's just as natural as the way that we live life, right?
Mhm.
I mean, when you frame it that way, it's going to stand out to people and it's going to be highlighted in a certain way. And then it's like, and I'm not saying that you're doing it intentionally or like
No, I hear
what
you.
have you,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
if it's happening and it's going on, it's natural in the sense of the workings of the cosmos, right?
yeah,
And again, like you have this idea of these entities and they feed off of negative energy and all that. And I mean that wouldn't surprise me, right? And just as like the way we uh we eat other animals, right? That's like that would sound horrendous. That so if
yeah.
you flip the script, it's like the chain of that the food chain, right? Even Lou Elizondo was talking about that early on. Like we might not be the top of the food chain, right? We might not be the apex intelligence. And so if another intelligence was somehow
Preying upon us, right?
preying upon us, uh, they they might not be doing it even with malicious intent, right? That's their sustenance.
Yeah,
Um, So not that we should say, oh, that's okay, let them do their thing. Like, no, but that's why we need transparency, right? So people can have a greater of awareness and protect themselves, but also
exactly, exactly right.
to have the ideas like, is there some kind of non-human intelligence, whether it's extraterrestrial, whether it's crypto-terrestrial, whether it's extra-dimensional or interdimensional, or even future human, trying to guide us in a particular direction? And if that is possible, then what can we do about it so that we have our sovereignty, that we are living by our ideas and our inclinations?
Mhm.
And is there even advanced intelligences that have been trying to guide us in the right direction? And are there competing agendas from different intelligences with us, some of them trying to guide us in the right direction and others not so much? And I don't want to say a fun theory, but like one thing that does concern me is this argument around technology and artificial intelligence and transhumanism. Somebody notably who's talked about it in a my opinion is a mature and informed and insightful way is Greg Braden. Um, I don't think he said it in this way, but what if there were these crash retrievals, right, or gifts that we were gifted technology for the purpose of us to evolve technologically in a certain way so that we integrate technology within our bodies so that we evolve in that way, and then because we're going to become like cyborg or cybernetic and start having these implants and chips and AI ruling everything, that that path of evolution is being seeded into humanity so that we, go into a certain direction of evolution that is influenced by a non-human intelligence that lost their organic and spiritual connection to source, and they want us to integrate into their technological society and become a hive mind that can no longer reproduce, right? Like, so you hear these kind of things, and I mean, that's something that, like, we should have a right to know, right? If
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that is going on, and we should have a choice. That's one reason why transparency is so important. So again, it comes back to this kind of thing of like, we need transparency. Uh, we need to be informed, and we should be able to make those kind of decisions, right? As a society, right? Maybe people want to integrate into that technological, post-biological society, and maybe others don't. Maybe others want to um, remain connected to source, or right, and go down this intuitive, creative, spiritual path. Um, so I do think there's probably different intelligences that are influencing us in different ways, and it's all just a circus of confusion if we don't have transparency.
Absolutely. And I think that, like you were saying before, I think that finding out that we're not the top of the food chain is not necessarily a death sentence. It'll make us be smarter, maybe more hygienic, figure out what is safe, what isn't safe, best practices, those sorts of things. And maybe by doing those sorts of, behaviors, we begin to wrest some control back of our own evolution because we realize that by, A, B, or C, we're opening ourselves up for control. Whereas if we don't do those things, then we have more autonomy. But yeah, absolutely goes back to us being fully informed on what the reality is, and if they know it, then they need to share it. Where do you? I mean, we've got about 20 minutes left. What do you think of the transparency conversation happening right now? I
I
mean,
think
obviously, the UAPDA just got reintroduced, so that's a good sign. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's complicated,
Yeah,
and I think it's unprecedented. And ultimately, at the end of the day, even if people say, "Oh, it's like 90% or 95% disinformation," regardless of that, it's inevitable that we're going to come to this point. So let's get on with it, is my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah,
Is that, yeah, I mean, I think that, the way that I do think that there has been a strategy within the UFO community, within the UAP transparency movement, that was adapted from the modern day propaganda machine of just overloading people with information. I
mhm,
think that's been utilized to pump information into the UFO community to keep us distracted.
yeah, yeah,
So like I do think that stuff like that goes on. At the same time, like all these things happening with Congress and the Senate, and in my opinion, that there's these different factions, some that want transparency, others that, I mean, I think probably people that don't want transparency is the minority, right? Let me
yeah,
just paint the picture and say that what people consider MJ12 or whatever, let's just say that there's like a few hundred people that have actual direct knowledge of this. Maybe even we'll say a few thousand, right? Let's just, if I want to make it complicated. I would say the people that don't want this out at all is a very small number of the group. And a lot of the friction is in the let's just say there's a number of these factions and groups that want different levels of disclosure, is that they're trying to negotiate what level of transparency there is, knowing that once there is some level of transparency, there's no going back,
yeah,
right? And how are we going to deal with uh, this uncertainty, which is, again, it's inevitable. It's going to happen either way. You had Carl Nell put forward the plan. I mean, he's telling you the game plan, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that was a pitch. I think that was his negotiation pitch, saying like, "Hey, let's do it like this. This isn't so bad, right? We got it planned out like it could go down like this."
Yeah.
But so
We're still a ways out according to that plan, though.
right,
You
and
know.
I mean it is a bit presumptuous to assume that non-human intelligence is going to go on with whatever planet is.
Yeah, right.
So, and in that kind of regard, that's why I encourage people to participate in the conversation, in
Hmm.
research, in field work, in CE5 and contact work, but also, people developing psi, right? Like if you have all these people developing like remote viewing or even like that can see through solid objects and all these other extraordinary human potentials, like what can they really keep secret? Right?
Yeah.
Like so like uh so I it's what's going on with the like the current UAP transparency and everything. It has to happen regardless whether there's disinformation around it or not. It has to happen.
Yeah.
So again, if people are informed and just aware of the terrain and they're aware that there's disinformation, they're aware that their attention is intentionally being directed in certain ways, um, you know, and they should stick to their guns in sense of like what are they ultimately participating for, right? They have to
Hmm.
follow their own truth. I hate to say like follow your own bliss, right? But you have to follow your own inner compass when it
Yeah.
comes to this or anything else, right?
Hmm.
And that comes back to like this discernment thing. But I think the best that anybody can do is to follow their inner compass and and just to become more aware and gradually, if they feel so inclined, participate in the way that they think that is going to be um, uh, constructive in the community.
Yeah. I'm not asking you to get political here, but the vice president just today said that he's going to get into the UFOs coming up. Like up this month in August, he said he's going to take a long look at UFOs. If the Trump administration were to come out and say, we're looking at disclosure, um, would you trust what comes out of the White House at this point?
I would. I mean, it doesn't matter who's in any office.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
I'm highly skeptical of anything that is going to come out from
Mhm.
any official institution is managed, right?
Yeah,
At the
always.
same time, that's not to say we should just completely reject it. Um, and then because again, people want this disclosure. It can only come from people who have the ability to disclose it, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're in this paradox of
Depending on the
how
people that have betrayed us, ostensibly, I mean, or at least kept the secret.
well, again, yeah, right. And there's different levels to that. There's people that are
Sure.
just, I mean, people are just brought in, right? And they're just
Hmm.
like, they find themselves in this conundrum. So
Yeah.
therefore, what do you do? Like they want to help. They maybe can in different ways. So it's, uh,
It's
you
not all
know,
actively a decision on people's
well,
part to
it's
maintain
so
the
funny.
secrecy.
I was just talking to Chris Leto the other day, and he was talking about things in like as systems, right? Like where something becomes an entity unto itself, right? Like even like a corporation can, or an institution or a government or whatever, right? And
Hyper
that,
object almost.
right, yeah. And so
Yeah.
that system will always try to maintain equilibrium and survive, right? Like that's
Yeah.
so I think that is that, if there is like there or not there is, um, if whatever the secret seek group is an entity into itself. And I don't mean that in a metaphysical way. I mean, even just practically and logistically, just understanding that framework, I think is helpful to like it has its own momentum. It's its own
Yeah.
thing now, and it's not relying on this one person. If you just say you have a random person named Todd, and he's one of the top three people in MJ12, and he comes out and says, there's extraterrestrials here or non-human intelligence. We have their craft. We've been reverse engineering it, and it's at Area 51 and all this. these people that are in on the inside know that they're going to come out, say this thing, and guess what? The next day, everybody's forgotten about it. Half the people think he's a kook. Half the
Mhm.
people think he's a martyr. And at the end of the day, we don't get anywhere because it hasn't been like done in the right way, right? And I don't know, there is a right way. I'm just trying to set an example of like it's not as easy as everybody thinks, right? And it's an
Yeah.
entity unto itself, and it's not relying on any one cog in that system.
Yeah, it needs a more global kind of collapse in order for this information to come out and
Well,
actually be
because even if you
accepted.
have several like cogs within that system, that doesn't mean they're just going to bring the whole system down. And even if they did, what does that mean, right?
Yeah,
Does that put our nation at a security risk if we compromise our own reverse engineering program, right? Like I don't want to put it, I'm not defending that narrative, but what I'm saying is like people have to realize like how are these people thinking, right? Because we also, again, I know there's very combative attitudes toward it, and I totally understand it, right? Like I get it. People have been hurt, marginalized, even killed to keep the UFO secret. But this other kind of thing, they have a perspective, and not that they're right, but even no matter how wrong they are, we still have to have compassion for that, right? If only not just to better understand the reality of the situation, right?
absolutely. Well, that's why, I mean, again, that's why for a long time I had a lot of hope about Skywatcher, because their mode of producing something and just saying, okay, we're going to grab it and bring it down and fly it and land it on the tarmac, that is going to make all of those questions irrelevant in the short term because it's not going to be about having some agency come forward and say, here's the truth. It's going to be suddenly they have a piece of the truth and they can show it around. And if they do their work properly and they have all the scientific bona fides that go along with that, then they can publish it and it can become sort of part of our accepted narrative. It's been quiet in Skywatcher HQ for a while. They put out a press or a release earlier this week saying that they are actually still working and that episode 3 on psionics is about to come out. And that's heartening. But I think that if the phenomenon is not going to land on the White House lawn, and it's up to us and to somehow be involved in generating enough evidence to make this scientifically verifiable, maybe something like Skywatcher is the actual approach. You know, having someone like Gary Nolan involved is hopeful. So we'll see. I feel like that no matter what happens in a space like the national security space, people tend to chase their tails and tend to be really cautious and conservative because they don't want to unravel national security secrets. They don't want to ever encourage any kind of threat to our safety. So the idea that they're going to offer up this secret eventually seems like they'll just keep talking themselves out of it. It's like there's so many complexities to the conversation, so many downstream effects that could happen that even though one generation might be interested and thinking long-term disclosure is the option that they want, the next generation might be a little bit more conservative, and it just kind of keeps bouncing back and forth. So something like Skywatcher may be ultimately the way to get forward, but we'll see. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever just one thing, right?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's been step by step, and even say like the Disclosure Project in 2001,
Yeah.
May 9th, 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer comes out with all these witnesses, whistleblowers, and insiders. And I'm sure at the time people thought this is it,
This is
right?
it. Next week we're gonna
This
have
is it.
it.
And because and I'm sure, like I have no doubt at the time that was one of the most tremendous things to ever occur in the history of the UFO subject.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't think we would be here having this conversation if it were not for that event. That was a
Hmm.
culmination of hundreds, if not more, people working together. Often Dr. Edgar Mitchell doesn't get the recognition, but he was intimately involved with that process, and for one reason or another, he didn't get the credit that he deserved in that. And that is in part why people strayed away from certain individuals. But again, you had the citizens hearing on disclosure. You had UFOs and nukes at the National Press Conference. You had the X conferences with James Fox and Leslie Kean at um, the National Press Conference, and all these were tremendous, and all these have contributed. If it weren't for those prior events, we would not have, for better or worse, right? We would not have had a TTSA,
Yeah.
uh, because Stephen Greer was like a mentor to Tom DeLonge, right?
Hmm.
And in a sense, Stephen Greer showed the way of like, okay, let's connect these networks of whistleblowers and get their information and help put it out there. Um, and I don't think we would have a Skywatcher if it wasn't for TTSA or the Disclosure Project. So this is
Sure.
all integrative. It's
Yeah,
been
it's
this,
building. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's been building to this point, right? And Skywatcher, you know, short of the phenomenon coming out and disclosing itself to everybody,
Mhm.
um, I don't think there's ever going to be the thing.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I see, and I mean, Cosmosis just put out an episode about Skywatcher today, which
Oh, I haven't seen it
is
yet.
good. It's going to rub people all kinds of ways. Uh, it's insightful, right?
Yeah, as
It's
always.
they ask
Yeah.
the questions that should be asked that sometimes people are afraid to ask,
Yeah.
um, and it's worthy of a mature discussion. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I mean, I'm grateful. Dr. Gary Nolan is somebody that has always been, uh, as far as my interactions and knowing him, has always been a really great guy. And if he's getting behind something, at least I know he's in that corner doing his thing on it, and it's going to go. He'll do the right thing with that. But again, I think the whole Skywatcher project is another kind of quantum leap forward, because again, we went from like TTSA kind of dialogue about disclosure to now we're bringing in the psionics, right? And
Hmm.
like CE5, we're validating CE5 in a sense. And that's huge. I mean, to me, that's almost bigger than revealing the UFO phenomenon itself, is that we have this capability. So,
Yeah.
for better or worse, and whatever criticism that Skywatcher receives, it's a huge leap forward, in my opinion,
Yeah.
in the level of conversation, and even like, to the stars. And if you read in between the lines, or even read their fiction work, the Secret Machines novels and stuff, they're
Oh, yeah.
talking about all this stuff, like
Oh,
the
yeah.
the
Absolutely.
psionics and stuff. So, and they are trying to like put it into the mythos, right? They're trying to build that kind of framework and idea in the mythology of UFO lore, so to speak. But Skywatcher did it in like a matter of fact, real life way, where they're stating the reality of, oh, we have psionics, or we have what they've called neuromeditators now. They changed the terminologies and stuff. I know they've been like adapting in real time to everything, and I've seen all the stuff, and I think they're trying to do a good job. I don't know them personally except for Gary, and yeah, pretty much I'll say, and I know James Hodgkins, but more so Dr. Nolan, for a long time. And I think it is important work, and I think, whether people demonize Skywatcher or any other group, it's part of the collective, and they're contributing. Like a lot of the people that will throw shades, like having contributed in the way that Skywatcher has, or the people that are working with Skywatcher have. So like let them do their thing, right? I think ultimately, uh, Skywatcher has made, their mark for sure in the community, but also in history, right? With saying, you know, these kind of capabilities of ESP are real, and you can use ESP to interact with non-human intelligence in not just like this kind of spiritual way, but in a practical way, where you're inviting these objects in and potentially have a landing. Now, that whole aspect of the conversation is where it gets a little more nuanced and complex because I don't know that any objects ever came down willingly on the, especially in a controlled area like the range. I think most of those objects were probably forced down.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's an ethical
so
question, right? I mean, that's huge.
right, and
Yeah.
so for them to get one of these objects to willingly come down in an area that doesn't have those kind of capabilities, I don't know if that's going to happen. But even in just what they're doing and spreading awareness, I think has had a very positive impact in how people look at the phenomenon in the sense where CE5 has been like demonized so hardcore because of Dr. Stephen Greer, right? You know, the best and the worst thing to ever happen to CE5 was Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
I say that jokingly, but you know, people wouldn't did not want to touch CE5, right? Or the idea at all just because it was associated with Greer. Um, for better or worse, right? And there's people that have like actual real um like reason for that, and I understand it. Um, but now it's less tied up into Stephen Greer and it's put into like the reality framework of well, you have all these other people doing it now. And so in my mind, their impact on the conversation of contact modalities has been a very positive outcome in their contribution already. Just if they were to just pack up and fold up and do nothing else, I think they contributed heavily to the awareness of the human potential aspect of the UFO question.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. And one of the things that I credit them for, I mean, it's rare in this space for people to be like, don't judge us by what we're saying, judge us by what we produce. And even if they don't land anything, if they can engage long enough to have craft fly through an airspace and get solid photos and solid video and do that in a way that's repeatable, that will also continue to build a stronger case for the presence of these things. And so I find that refreshing. Matt Pines is someone that I've had on my show before, and he is associated now with Skywatcher, and I think that he's got the highest of integrity. So, like him, and I don't know Gary personally. I've met him, but I've never like had a long personal conversation with him or anything. But he strikes me as someone who has integrity. He may not have the same priorities that I have in certain respects about the phenomenon, but he's definitely honorable, and I think wants the best for this subject. So with those two people, I'm willing to suspend my skepticism until there's a reason to be, doubtful. But
Yeah, I mean, I mean, again, I think the Skywatcher they came in and they literally changed the UFO
yeah,
conversation to a more nuanced, complex, and elevated one, right? Because
quickly. I
again,
mean, it was really like,
yeah, because
real
I mean,
fast.
again, we were at like this kind of and I'm not trying to compare or anything like that, but just to kind of like build a framework here of like the dialogue is you had like the to the stars version of disclosure,
Mhm.
right? Which is getting insiders and getting the government to comply. But now you have the next level of that is Skywatcher, which is like a private organization as well, but they're saying like, no, we're going to do it.
Yeah,
Right. So just that attitude and people saying, you know what? No, we can actually go out and collect data ourselves. We can go out and interact with the phenomenon ourselves. You know, these insider that like the government may never give it to us, so we're going to get it. That's an important attitude, right? Whether
absolutely.
you like Skywatcher or not, like we are fully capable. And that's an important message overall.
Well, I'm about out of time, James, but thank you for a fantastic conversation.
This talk was long overdue. I apologize for not talking sooner. It's absolutely great talking to you again. I want to make sure that everybody here watches your show and subscribes to it and shares it because you have one of the most thoughtful and thought-provoking shows around. So I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that, James. I really do, and I love your show, and I've been following in your in your footsteps. So thank you for trailblazing.
There were many others before me and before them, and we're
Yeah,
just,
yeah. We're all paving
participating
the
in
road
this
together.
collective. Yeah.
Yeah, like Skywatcher and
Yeah.
on down the line.
Yeah. We all have our part to play.